Welcome patrons! This is the last of the short September videos, but let's go over something quick that, granted, I don't get asked much about, but it's still pretty interesting. Let's talk languages in Thedas. The problem. Most people don't talk much about languages in Thedas, because as far as the player sees it, everyone speaks the same language, with very few exceptions. And here is the problem with languages in this series. It's set up in extra material and sometimes even the games itself that each nation has their own language that is mostly used, and then the common language / king's tongue / trade tongue is used as a secondary language to help people from all over Thedas to understand each other. But we don't really see that. If anything, we see the opposite. Most people use the common language, which the player sees as whatever language you're playing the game as, and then sometimes NPCs will use words or phrases from what should be their first language, even NPCs that aren't interacting with the PC. The real reason for this is that BioWare wrote these words, damn it, and they want you to understand them. So for the most part, we all just kind of give it a pass. But let's all understand that technically there are supposed to be language barriers in Thedas. It's just glossed over a lot. So let's talk about the languages themselves. I split this up into about 4 different categories that are really just made up, but I think made sense in my mind. And those categories are those languages that are actually just real languages, those that are based on real languages, those that are made up completely, and those that we know absolutely nothing about. Real languages. Common tongue. Also referred to as King's Tongue and Trade Tongue, although mostly only in the novels and in the Dragon Age RPG set, this is the most widespread language in Thedas. It was invented by the dwarves and is the most common language in Ferelden as a whole. This is the language that you hear in the game. If we want to get technical, as the games are written in English, it would be English, including dialects of the United Kingdom and North America. But I think that there is an argument to be made that as BioWare wants your game to be your canon, whatever language you play the games in is what Common is based on, which can get a bit confusing if you're playing in French and Spanish, but that's that. Antivan. Spoken in Antiva, this is based on the Spanish language, and from what I understand, it's mostly the Spanish spoken in Spain and not other parts of the world, but there's really only been like a handful of words here and there, so that might actually change later on. Orlesian. Spoken in Orlais, this is based on French, and from what I hear, mostly French-Canadian. Orlesian is interesting in that most people in Orlais speak both Common or Orlesian, but most actually use Common, except for a very small group of people living in rural Orlais in the marshes, and they only speak the one, they don't speak Common at all. Based on languages. Devine. This is also referred to as Tevinter, although only mostly by those not living in Tevinter. This language is based on Latin, and while it shares a lot of similarities, it is not exact at all. Ancient Devine. It's different enough to be separate from Devine itself, but is also, from what we know of it, based on Latin. Because mages often study ancient Tevinter texts, many circle mages actually speak ancient Devine, or at least are able to read it. Made-up languages. Elvish, or Elven. Spoken by the Elven people in Arlathan, it's been largely lost today. Even Dalish keepers, who are the only ones who know how to write the language, don't have a solid grasp on it. No one could really speak it in full, although a lot of words and phrases have been passed down and repeated. There seems to be 2 different writing types for Elvish, a more modern one that people recognize, and a very old version that is completely unknown. The language is described as being very hard to translate and is filled with double meanings and flowery language and dramatic terms, and is kind of hard to understand if you don't know the context. For us, the language bits that we have, it really isn't a real language. So for people asking me if I know Elvish, no. There actually is no way to know Elvish, because it's not really a language, it's a cipher. Functionally, this means that the writers use an English language base, and then they replace those English words with Elven-sounding ones, which, going forward, it's kind of how all of the Dragon Age languages that have been made up work, so it's not just Elvish, it's also Dorvan and Qumat, which we'll go over in a second here. Dorvan. The base Dorvan language is no longer spoken by the Dorvan people, save a few phrases here and there, but the people of the Shaperate do know it. The language is written in runes that seem to have pictorial meanings, if that makes sense. Like, the runes look like what they mean, as at least in Orlais, Dorvan runes are used for signs in more rural areas because of the low rate of literacy. There is an ancient Dorvan dialect as well that is similar but not quite the same as more modern Dorvan languages. Its runes are similar but also slightly different. And it seems this ancient language is the language of the Dorvan runes used in smithing and enchanting, but there is a possibility that the two are different. The mysterious Dorvan city of Kalsharok also uses a unique version of Dorvan, and while it does have some common vocabulary with the Dorvan that Orzammar knows, there are some noticeable differences. At least that's what they've told us. We don't actually know. Cunlot. Cunlot is the main language spoken by the Qunari. Most Qunari speak only Cunlot, with only those that travel around being taught any other languages. Those that convert to the Qun are also taught Cunlot very on. Because how else are you going to speak with anyone else? Unknown languages. There's a fairly large collection of languages that have been referred to, but we don't know much, if anything, about. Most of these we don't even have any vocabulary for, it's just names on a page, and apparently they're spoken some places, or have been spoken some places. The Ander language, spoken in the Anderfels, is what most of the names of the Darkspawn are, like Herlock, Genlock, and Sharlock. At least according to the Dragon Age tabletop role-playing game, the names that you're supposed to use for your Anders character is somewhat based in German. So I don't know if the Ander language is eventually going to become just German, but I don't know. This is all theory here. Syrian was spoken by the Syrian tribe who settled in Orlais. While I'm sure there are some scholars that know the language, the entire culture was lost when the nation of Orlais was founded, and none speak it as a first language currently. It likely sounds like an early version of French though, considering it would probably become Orlesian. The Canticle of Exaltation, which is part of the Chant of Light, was originally written in this language, and was also spoken by Emperor Draken. Ravani is the language of Ravane. Arcanum is listed in the Dragon Age role-playing tabletop game, but literally has no description of what it is at all. From the name, I guess we could assume it has something to do with magic. The Codex Scroll of Bannister also mentions a forgotten arcane language only known by obsessed linguists. That sounds similar to what this could be, but the Codex doesn't actually list what the language is, so that we might actually have two different ones. It might be the same one, I don't really know. And finally, in the comics, a Witch of the Wild speaks to a high dragon in what seems to be dragon. Here's a picture of what it looks like. I don't know what to say about this, other than apparently dragons speak this. And that, dear patrons, is all that we know on Thedas languages. Thank you for putting up with one more short video. I promise next week we'll get a little bit better and we'll slowly get back to more cool videos that are 20 minutes long again. It's been quite the month, guys. We've had some troubles here, but that's okay. If you still have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory, feel free to tweet me at Gilderthon on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillanon on Reddit. To rest, you're all.